right, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for coming out to our first session of the day here in Anderson. I'm really excited to be introducing our first speaker, Rick Klau. Rick leads the partnerships team at GV, where he connects the largest companies in the world to GV's portfolio. He was previously a product manager at Google, where he led product initiatives on Blogger, Google+, and YouTube. His professional experience includes leadership roles at several software and internet startups. He was an early employee at FeedBurner, where he ran the publisher services team until Google acquired the company in 2007. Outside of his love for technology, Rick is also a political junkie. He has lent technology advice to 3 US presidential campaigns, ran the campaign blog for President Barack Obama in his 2004 Senate race, and ran product strategy for and managed Google's presence at the Democratic National Convention in 2008. Everybody welcome Rick.
Thanks, Eric, and apologies for not being dressed up. I was telling Jeff just before this, I'm in the midst of moving, and all of my stuff is in boxes. I have no idea where my good clothes are. But I had this on for Game 4. I figured it was available. Wear it for Game 5. Hopefully we'll close out strong tonight. I'm here to talk about a topic that is largely an accident that I'm the guy to talk about. And that's a little embarrassing given the actual subject, which is all about sort of picking your spot and delivering on your goals. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about why I'm the one talking about objectives and key results, and then walk you through some of the things I've learned working with startups in my role at GV over the last 5 years, and then some of the time I spent at startups prior to that. My hope is that I've got just a handful of slides. Let's make this as conversational and interactive as possible. I would like for us to answer your questions more than I get to the end of my slides. That's always, for me, an accomplishment. So let me just walk you back a few years and explain the accident. So in my first role at Google Ventures, I ran something called Startup Lab, not unlike what True University is doing over the course of 2 days. We did through these periodic workshops that we would do for startups in the Google Ventures portfolio. And over a series of a couple of months, a number of startups in our portfolio were asking us about, not necessarily for objectives and key results. OKRs was not really a well-known topic at the time, but kind of broadly, how do we set goals? How do we keep the teams aligned? How did Google do this in the early days? And we, GV, knew that the answer to that was always the same, which was, well, Google used something called objectives and key results, a topic that had been introduced by John Doerr from Kleiner Perkins back when Google was less than a year old. And that continued and really helped set the stage and the foundation for how Google kept its teams aligned and grew and managed through this hyper-growth phase from 1998 all the way through to, at the time, 2012 was when I gave the talk. So my role in running the Startup Lab at GV was to go and find the right person to come and give a talk about whatever the subject was. So if it was about how to build and scale your product teams, I got Ken Norton, at the time a PM at Google, before he came over and joined me at Google Ventures. If it was crisis communications, I would get somebody from the SRE team at Google to talk about, when Gmail went down, what do you do? How do you manage internal communications? And get somebody from the comms team to talk about how you set expectations on the outside. For OKRs, it was such a mundane topic that it didn't feel like I should waste the bullet on somebody important to come and talk about OKRs. So I just said, well, look, I'll do it. And at the time, we were just doing these privately, in rooms about 1/10 of the size of this, and then we would live stream them to people in the portfolio. Then we made the video public, and a funny thing happened. First of all, if I'd known that anybody was going to have watched this video, 2 things. 1, I would have made the slides look a hell of a lot better. And 2, I would have made it really short. Instead, it was an hour and a half long. And then you see here, as of last night, it's been watched over 300,000 times. YouTube gives you this really handy analytics interface that you can see that I have wasted 7 years of humanity having people listen to me talk about OKRs. And I am now adding to that waste of humanity by all of you times an hour. So I apologize in advance. So one of the things I have decided to do is that instead of being the accidental OKR guy, where I just sort of backed into this as the, look, I'll do it because I don't want to waste anybody important's time. And now, 4 years later, I have worked with hundreds of startups all over the world, many in our portfolio, but also all over the globe, where they say, well, look, we watched your YouTube video, we now want to do this, we have some questions, and now I'm the guy who has talked about this and worked with a lot of teams to try and work through a number of issues that they've had. So, two things. One, I'm actually setting a goal at the outset, right, which is important. I'll talk about why in a moment. And two, instead of really boring slides like the ones that I used the last time, I'm giving you my vacation pictures of national parks I have visited over the last several years, so that at the very least you have something pretty to look at while I drone on about goals and objectives and key results. So my goal is I want all of you to actually commit to using this or something like it within your own companies for at least 2 quarters. And that's a really important aspect of this. It's not something you just try after a month, give it up, and move on. So let's talk about what OKRs are, first of all, and then I'm going to talk about a few of the things that I think are the common objections that I hear from startups about why they shouldn't or couldn't do them. And then I'm going to talk about a few of the things about what makes them work inside of startups, and then hopefully we'll get questions and make this interactive. So first and foremost, OKRs, objectives and key results, they are 2 components. They are goals that you are setting within your organization that are set quarterly, and we can talk about, everybody wants to think that maybe their time period might be different, but we'll talk about that. And these goals create alignment across the organization. Now, many of you are hearing that and looking at that and saying, well, gee, that seems pretty simple. And that's actually one of the benefits, is that this is really, really simple. In fact, one of the ironies of becoming the OKR guy through this video and then having a lot of people reach out to me is that it's actually, you can overthink this. It's actually pretty simple to, at the top, say, okay, this is what we're going to do, and then these are the metrics that are going to tell us how we got, if we got there. And then, amazingly enough, you actually do get alignment from that. We'll talk about how that happens in a moment. OKRs, this is super important. And this really shocked me in my first days at Google now 9 years ago. OKRs are public within the organization. When I say public, I mean public within the company. You're not putting this on the company blog or tweeting out, you know, your company's goals. Because sometimes these are competitive advantages, right? The milestones that you want to set for your organization, everyone in the company needs to know what those goals are. And I say this took me by surprise when I joined Google. I joined in June of 2007, so almost exactly 9 years ago. And the first day, got my laptop, got my training, got my login, and was stunned that I had access to basically every single piece of internal information at Google. I could look at query volume by country. I could look at what Gmail's daily active user numbers were. I could see what Larry and Sergey's OKRs were. And it had a really amazing impact. I was sure, by the way, they'd made a mistake and that they'd turn it off the next day. So I was in a hotel room and I didn't go to bed because I'm like, I gotta get as much as I can before they turn this off. By sharing this inside the organization, you are communicating to the company what actually matters most to the founder, to the CEO, to the leadership team, and then out, and it trickles out. Let's talk real quickly about what OKRs are not. Probably the single biggest mistake I see companies make is that in their minds, OKRs are really a to-do list. I walked into one of our portfolio companies about 1.5 years ago, and the CEO said, no, yeah, we've already got something like OKRs, and it's right here. And on the whiteboard was literally a checklist. And it was the quarter's to-do list for the entire team. And I said, okay, well, so how do you know at the end of the quarter when all of those things are checked off that any of it mattered? And he said, well, but this is what we want to do. This is, at the end of the quarter, if we've done all of that, it'll be great. I'm like, well, how will you know? And they didn't have an answer for that. However, at the end of a quarter where they'd checked 10 of the 12 things off, it felt a lot like progress. But they had no way to know if those were the things that actually mattered. So it's critical that when you think about OKRs in setting these goals and then finding the key results that define success for those goals, that you are not treating this as a shared company-wide to-do list. Another really important mechanism, and this is more for companies as they mature and get a little bit bigger and you start doing more formal performance review processes. Companies often try and combine these things. That if an employee says, I will do X, I'll grow the product's usage to 1 million 7-day active users. And then they got to 600,000, that's 60% of the goal. So if it's bonus time and we look at your OKRs for the last year, well, you got 60% of the way there. So 60% of your bonus, here you go. Well, this creates a really odd dynamic within the company, which is you want people to be shooting for the stars, right? Google talks a lot about moonshots and thinking ambitiously. Well, you can't expect your employees to set really ambitious goals if you are penalizing them if they come up at all short, right? If you get to 60% of 1 million, you get to 600,000 7-day active users and you were at 10,000 the year before, that's astoundingly great. But if the employee wants their bonus, which presumably they do, they're going to set very realistic, very achievable goals. So you want to decouple the process of setting goals and measuring success from the performance review process. Now, they can be an input, but you cannot have them just be the same thing. And then finally, you don't want to tell people how to do a thing. You want them to you want to tell them what you expect them to accomplish. And that's a really important distinction. OKRs are a great way to define what success will look like, but then leave it up to the team to get creative. So let me dig into this a little bit. When I talk about ambitious, aggressive goals, I'll give you an example. I was running Blogger, this was several years ago, and we were having an issue. We were noticing that latency outside of North America was a tremendous issue. Anybody coming in from Asia in particular, we're seeing not just millisecond delays, but often seconds of delays in loading page views. We know speed is a feature at Google, so we had a theory that if we could reduce latency, we would increase page views in Asia, and that would drive increased traffic and engagement across the product. Now, the traditional way to set goals is to say we want to make this 10 or 20% better, because that feels achievable at the beginning of a quarter. You can get incrementally better. But the OKR way of thinking is instead to say, what would really aggressive, makes me feel uncomfortable success look like? And then we'll work backwards to try and figure out how to get there. So our OKR for that quarter, for Blogger, was to reduce latency by 90%, which was not technically possible by just doing incremental progress. We knew no matter what, we could multi-home the places where the data actually lived. We could tune the database calls. We could do things that would make it incrementally better, but no amount of 1, 2, 5, 10% benefit would get us to 90%. So we set the goal without any idea how we'd accomplish it, but we knew if we could get to 90%, it would be fantastic. By not telling our engineers how to actually get that 90% number, it freed them up to think creatively about what they might be able to do that would achieve really ridiculous success. And in this particular case, Pong came up with a then crazy idea, which was to serve all of Blogger, which was doing over 1 billion page views a day, way back when, out of RAM, which was a really expensive, surprisingly difficult thing to do. But he's like, I think if I can do that, then it'll fix our latency problem. And he did, and he was right. And we didn't reduce latency by 90%. We reduced it by about 96%. So the mistake you make if you set goals and be very specific about what you expect the team to accomplish is at best you will only get that much. If instead you free the team up to think very creatively with a very aggressive goal, you're giving them room to get creative. And it's important not to use OKRs as the how. Instead, it's what do you want to accomplish. So one mistake I made in the video that if you do go back and watch, and at least use the YouTube, watch it at double speed so you don't take an hour and a half. is that I talked about setting individual OKRs. Ignore them. Just think about setting at the company level and then at the department level or the team level. We can talk more about that, but I think just for purposes of this, let's just say ignore the individual levels and think about it at the company level and at the team level. Now, I'm going to tell you a quick story. You heard from Eric. I came to Google through the FeedBurner acquisition. Dick Costello was my boss. He was the CEO at FeedBurner at the time, then went on to run Twitter for a while. Biggest lesson I took away from FeedBurner has to do with this, and it's what are we not doing? I was head of publisher services at FeedBurner. My job was to go out and get all the feeds. So FeedBurner syndicated RSS content, whether that was for news sites, blogs, podcasts. And it was my job to work with publishers to then take their feeds in and syndicate them and build an ad platform on top of it. And an early trip to New York City, I had a meeting with American Express, who was not what you would think of as a traditional news publisher, but they wanted to work with FeedBurner, and even better, they wanted to pay us about 30 grand a month to take their RSS content that they were using for email marketing and then syndicate that out. Now, FeedBurner at the time had $0 of revenue. So I thought, coming back from New York, I was a conquering hero, right? I got a 6-figure deal. This is fantastic. And Dick's immediate response was, no, that's not the business that we're building. Until we know whether the business we're building works or not, we shouldn't distract ourselves with this other thing. OKRs are a way for you to say what you are doing, but by definition, anything that is not an objective for the company in that quarter, you are not committed to. Right? This is a way to give your team permission to say, look, we have agreed. These are the things we want to try and accomplish this quarter. So anything not on the list, we are not focused on. Doesn't mean it's a bad idea. It just means it's not something we're focused on right now. Okay, here are a few reasons why this won't work. Here are some objections I'm going to anticipate some of you have had. One, you're too small. Right? If you're an early team, you're 3, 5, 10 people, this is just weighing you down. It's going to be too much work. I've seen teams of 3, 4, and 5 benefit from this, if only to have the conversation early on about what are those 1, 2, or 3 main goals that you're trying to achieve. It is remarkable if you don't actually have the forcing function of what is it you're trying to accomplish. Everyone has subtly different definitions of what it is they're trying to do. Or assumptions baked into, well, I and my team are going to do this, and I assume that you're working on that thing that's going to help me. And if you don't actually have the conversation that bubbles it up, you may find that you are working on very different projects. Okay, we'll talk about the quarterly cadence. I've had a lot of teams insist that they need monthly. I even had one that said, oh, we need to set our goals weekly. This is where I think it's a difference between what are we going to do to make progress over the next week, the next month, versus what do we really want to accomplish in some period of time. The reason I like the quarterly cadence is that it gives you an appropriate amount of time to work on something sufficiently ambitious to then give the team room to experiment and iterate. If you're setting goals on a monthly basis, it's just a few weeks. It's hard to see major milestone accomplishments in 2, 3, 4 weeks. That said, I've seen some teams work at this pace. Think on it's a marathon, not a sprint theory. It can be hard to sustain that amount of major progress over that short a period of time. And then I hear this a lot, well, this is just process, this is, Dilbert, TPS reports, that sort of thing. Remember at the very beginning I said this, you don't want to overthink this. This should just be maybe a couple hours total in a given quarter. This is not very heavyweight. And I'm going to talk very tactically about how to think through what an objective is and what key results are. I just wanted to set a foundation here. But it really is not process. I've seen people build out Gantt charts and big complicated spreadsheets. I think that's way too much thought going into this. I had a CEO in our portfolio actually ask me about this. He was worried about, what if I say to my team, we're going to accomplish X, and we don't? Like, won't I look wrong, incompetent? Won't I look like I don't understand what it is we're building? Actually, that's not been my experience. If anything, transparency builds confidence among the team that you're willing to experiment, and accountability to the results is equally important. That the team feels like, look, everyone is equally accountable, and we're owning up to both our successes but our failures. Okay, key results. So let me take a step back. You set as a team 1, 2, or 3, no more than 3, high-level objectives. And these are goals that should be ambitious, that define what tremendous success would look like for your organization in that quarter. What you want to avoid are key results. So the key results are just the numbers that reflect the accomplishment of that goal. Okay? If you don't use numbers and you don't use metrics and you use more binary terms like decide on what we're going to do with V2 of the product, or launch the next generation of our interface, or improve something, right? Make Gmail better. Well, now you're introducing subjectivity into the evaluation of whether or not you actually made any progress. Your goal should be that you could grab somebody off the street, sit them down, and say, 3 months ago, we all agreed that we were going to get Gmail to 1 billion 30-day active users. And the person off the street will say, well, okay, so that's what you said at the beginning of the quarter. What'd you get? Like, we got 600 million. Okay, you got 60%. Introducing objectivity into the evaluation of whether or not you achieved that objective takes politics and favoritism and negotiation out of that accountability. Everyone agrees, like, look, we're going to look at metrics. The metrics are going to drive whether or not we believe that we achieved the objective that we set out to do. My partner I mentioned earlier, Ken Norton at GV, talks about this a lot, that when he would be setting OKRs for his teams, he would get in the habit of just simply asking, and then what? The team would say, we want to do X. He'd say, all right, well, and then what? And keep asking to tease out, what is the thing you're trying to actually accomplish? What is the big idea? And at the end of that process, you will likely have identified the thing you actually care about. So don't say you want to launch a product. You're launching a product presumably because there's either a new market segment you're trying to tackle, or there are usability issues with the prior version that you're trying to fix, or there's engagement issues that you're trying to improve. Whatever the case is, you're going to tease that out, and then you want to find the numbers that reflect whether you accomplished that or not. Okay. When OKRs are actually working inside of your organization, first and foremost, failure becomes, it's a feature. It's not a bug. Right? I've seen people talk about in Silicon Valley, we celebrate failure. I don't. I don't feel good when I fail. But I do learn from it. And I do like seeing teams that see failure as a successful outcome, in that it becomes data that informs future decision making. You said you were going to do X. You didn't actually do X. What did we learn as a result of that? Well, that's useful information because that will inform our future OKRs, where we can say, look, at least given similar circumstances, when we tried that before, it didn't work, and here's what we think we learned as a result of that. So you embrace failure, you learn from it, you don't stigmatize it. I've talked to people since I joined Google who marvel at the fact that every quarter, Larry and Sergey, now Sundar, at Google, stand up in front of the company and say, okay, here were the OKRs for last quarter. and I'm going to get each individual owner across divisions, and they're going to say how they did on those OKRs. And when they really failed, and they got a 0, we'll talk about scoring in a moment, they own up to it. And they explain what they learned that they didn't know at the beginning of the quarter, and then how that informs the next set of objectives. Are they punting? Or are they taking what they learned and making adjustments and calibrating to what they can accomplish in the next quarter? When I say OKRs give you superpowers, I'm really thinking about two specific things here. One is, as a team, you learn how to predict the future. And that's a pretty powerful feeling within a startup. Right? You're trying to will something into existence. You are trying to create something that does not exist today. In setting an OKR at the beginning of a quarter, you are saying, we are going to accomplish something. We are going to do something. And if it's sufficiently ambitious, if it's really aggressive, going into that quarter, you should have a pit in your stomach because you don't know how you're going to do that thing. Right? Rational, sensible, normal people, i.e. those who don't work at startups, would look at that objective and say, there's just no way. Facebook could do that in a week. Google tried that and it didn't work. I heard Apple's got 1,000 people trying to do that. But you look at that, and as a team, you all say, yeah, you know what? We think if enough things go our way, we could do that. And the first time the team sets their mark and looks out 90 days and says, we believe we can do that. And then at the end of the quarter, you look back, and you did, you feel invincible. And the team gets this sense of accomplishment from having pulled off something highly improbable, and then believes they can do it again. And it becomes a muscle that you start exercising, and you do it again and again and again. So the other, and this is particularly for the founders, CEOs in the room, you get the ability to be in every single room where every decision is made without actually being in the room. And here's what I mean by that. When you set your objectives at a company level, you are saying for this quarter, the most important thing for us as a company, 1, 2, 3. And here are the numbers that are going to reflect what successfully accomplishing those objectives look like. And then each of your team members, product, engineering, ops, finance, whatever else, depending on how large you are, listen to those 1, 2, or 3 objectives, and then within themselves say, okay, for me on product, here's what I believe the product team's 3 objectives need to be. And by extension, 4 through 12 are the things we're not going to be focused on. And the same happens for engineering, the same happens for ops. And there's a calibration now that has happened. So now fast forward 2, 3, 4 weeks into the quarter, and product is hung up on some question that they're trying to wrestle with. Without the CEO being in the room, everyone at that table knows what is most important to the company for that quarter. Everyone at that table knows exactly what the founder and CEO is trying to accomplish and is most focused on that quarter. So as they're hashing out, do we do X, do we do Y? There is agreement, there is a fluency in what the company has committed to that they can now start to say, well, if the founder was in the room, how would she look at this decision to make? And 90% of the time, given consistency of what those objectives are and the understanding of those objectives, and an understanding of what metrics we care most about, you're going to know what she cares about. You're going to know what she would do, and everyone in the room is going to say, yeah, you're right. Now, that's not 100% of the time, but what you've just done is eliminate 90% of the escalations to the CEO in the room at the time that the decision's being made. And now the founder and CEO gets time back where she can be out raising the next round, can be working, scaling up engineering, or whatever else it is, that she's focused on for that quarter. I'm going to pause there. I realize I did not go into the tactical of how do you actually set OKRs up, and I'm happy to do so. I always know getting room, some people have already worked with OKRs, others haven't. I wanted to give you a broad sense of why I think these matter. Now I want to pause and see what questions do you have about what I've talked about at the high level. Do you want to go deep? Do you want to try and apply to your own circumstances? Let me know. What questions can I answer? All the way back. Yeah. Yes. Yes, this is the squirrel syndrome, right? Where somebody sees a squirrel run by and they're like, squirrel? And they go and do that, and then they stopped paying any attention to their OKRs. So I'll repeat the question because I think we're videotaping here. So the question is, been in situations before where teams start working on the thing that they think is most important that was not what was agreed upon at the beginning of the quarter, and now you get out of alignment, and then is there a reckoning or a calibration that happens at the end of the quarter? So let me take a step back, and I'm going to come back to that because I'll give you an example from a company in our portfolio. CEO asked me to come in. She had me meet with all of her direct reports. The company at this point was probably about 200 employees. And we went, it took about 3 hours. They had nothing like OKRs in place, and they had the exact situation that you're describing, where each team was doing what they felt was most important in that particular period of time, with no affordance for engineering really needs me to focus on this, because if my product team doesn't focus on this, then engineering is going to have code without, we're not going to ship, because product is off, doing PRDs for some other thing that doesn't connect to where the engineers are spending their time. So I went around the room and I asked all of the direct reports. I got up on a whiteboard about this size, actually, and said, all right, everybody tell me what are the most important things the company's working on right now. And in about 15 minutes, we had 14 most important things. So then I handed out Post-its to each of the people. I think there were 7, not counting the CEO. And I gave them each 3 Post-its, and I said, all right, you get to vote on those. And pretty quickly, 3 got the most votes. So that means 11 mattered to one person in the room, or 2 people, but not really anybody else. So the first question I asked to that room was, okay, would you rather know today that in 90 days, 4 through 14 aren't going to happen? Or would you rather be surprised at the end of the quarter when you think that this really matters to the company, and then at the end of the quarter, you didn't get very far? Right? The CFO, by the way, one of her comments was margin. She really wanted to see margin improvement, and that got 1 vote. I said, all right. I looked at her and I said, would you like to know now that 90 days from now you will have made no progress on margin? Or do you want to be shocked 90 days from now? And she said, well, I'm going to be pissed. I said, no, I'm not saying you shouldn't be pissed. But would you rather be pissed now and then have 90 days to get over it? Or would you rather find out in 90 days that, it just didn't come together? And she sort of reluctantly agreed that, yeah, it's probably better to know now because she can then focus her time and energy elsewhere. Second part of that gets back to your question, which is, by getting that alignment early, each of those teams are tacitly promising each other that, yeah, these are the things that are important for my team to work on because everyone else has some dependency. So in that exercise, we got to the 3, and the company some more eagerly than others, agreed, yep, those 3 things. If we can do those 3 things as a team, we will crush it. I said, all right, great. Pulled the VP of engineering up. I said, all right, those are the 3 things that your CEO and all of you have agreed matter most to the company. Now, as a VP of engineering, what are you working on? What is your team most focused on this quarter? And he had about 8 things. I said, all right, cross off the things that don't connect to those 3. And kind of grudgingly started crossing them off, got it down to 3. And then a really terrifying thing happened. He goes, I forgot. And he grabbed the marker and he wrote number 9, Europe. And I looked and I said, well, what the hell does that mean? He goes, oh, we have to launch in 5 countries because we found out a competitor is planning on launching in Europe as well, so we want to make sure we get out first. And I looked at everyone else in the room. I said, okay, we're 90 minutes into this meeting that we've been talking about the most important things to the company, and the first time I've heard the word Europe is when the VP of engineering tells me he's got 2 engineers working on Europe. Doesn't sales need to be involved in Europe? Oh, yeah. Won't operations have to light up offices? Yeah. Won't the CEO be in Europe most of the quarter doing press calls and prep? Yeah. Oh my God. It hadn't occurred to any of them that Europe was one of those 3 priorities. So we had to stop, sit the VP of engineering down, go back and say, okay, which of those 3 isn't happening because you need everyone focused on Europe? Only at that point did that alignment happen, where the team actually all understood what everyone else was working on. And at one point, customer support and operations said, well, you know what? If Europe really is critical and I need to probably get local specialists up and running and trained in whatever language it is that we're launching, well, then that thing that I promised probably isn't going to happen. I said, that's awesome. Again, better that you know it now than later. So the way OKRs work is that you set your goals at the beginning of the quarter. Look, stuff happens. You may 4 weeks in realize there is no way we're going to hit that goal. Rather than continue to tilt at the windmill for 12 weeks, stop. Take the 0. Admit to the rest of the team, it's not going to happen. Because the sooner you know, the better you are. Now you can take those resources and throw them at something else. Maybe you can double down and that team can say, look, instead of doing 3 things, we're going to do 2. And that's going to increase the likelihood that we're going to achieve those 2. The key here, back to your question about what happens when teams sort of derail, sometimes stopping a thing is a great outcome. Because, again, it's just not going to happen. But that needs to be communicated. Right? The rest of the company needs to know that product is now no longer focused on achieving that thing. And there needs to then be a conversation about, okay, now that we've freed up some amount of time and effort and attention, where are we going to focus that on the things that matter most to the company? It is most common that that derailing happens at the team level. If that's happening at the company level frequently, I think that's a bigger problem. That help? Yeah. I see a question here, and then I'll come to Jeff. Yeah. Yeah, so it's a great question, and the question is, there's some element of you got to keep the lights on, right? And the trash still needs to get emptied, and things just need to be functioning for the company to be a going concern. And if that's not really one of the 3 most important things at a company level, how do you account for that? The best answer to that actually came from one of our portfolio CEOs who the light bulb went on, and her comment to me was, I see this as a way of the team doing warm-ups, right? So to take it might be the finance team, right? Or it might be the ops team, or it might be the whomever. In her opinion, at some point, everyone's number is going to get called. right? That there will be a quarter where our support is abysmally awful. And that has become the biggest impediment to us growing. Or it has become such a problem that attrition now is destroying the company. We no longer have predictable insight into what our revenue is going to be. At that point, I can't have that be the first quarter that the support team has thought about how to use OKRs, right? Instead, this becomes a way for each team to think about, in a given quarter, they might not be working on something that is critically important among the top 3 things that the CEO is most focused on, but they are absolutely trying to improve their own operation within their department. And the better acclimated they are to understanding what matters most to the company and how to set unusually aggressive goals, the better able they will be when their number gets called. So take sales as an example. If I'm running an inside sales team, yeah, the CEO might be most focused on launching in Europe, to take a real example. And my inside sales team might not be relevant because we haven't launched and there's not much for me to do. But maybe I could find a way to reduce time from initial call to meeting to quote to close. Maybe I can decrease that by 90%. Now, if I can do that, we're going to get a lot more money coming out the other side. Or we might see that there's a real breakdown in that funnel, that we're calling the wrong people. And that information will be really useful to marketing and the outside sales team and to the leadership who are having me call the wrong customers. And maybe that's because we have a fundamental misunderstanding about who benefits from using our product. So it should be a feedback loop. I had somebody, a company that has a retail component, where they said, well, I can see how OKRs would apply to engineering, operations, the leadership team. But I wouldn't ever share this with the people in the stores. I thought that was kind of weird. And I said, well, why? And they said, well, they're ringing up products and they're checking people out, but that's not really, they're not connected to the big picture of what the company is trying to accomplish. And I thought, well, actually, they might be the most connected. And they might be the ones to find the major disconnect between what you all think you're doing and what the customers are actually experiencing. And at the very least, you need to have that communication from leadership through to everyone else in the company, because it might be that person at the checkout counter who has the insight that says, we could automate that, or I'm constantly getting people coming in and asking, why don't we sell X? And you said that our biggest goal for the quarter is to develop this new line of revenue. Well, I had 14 people in the last 3 days ask me about this. Maybe is that something we're thinking about? If you don't have that communication, and those people in the just functional roles aren't included in what the CEO and leadership are most focused on, you won't get the benefit of that two-way signal. Jeff, you have a question?
Yeah, it seems like you've been connecting the success of OKRs to how you articulate the goals themselves, right? So that they're measurable.
Yep.
I wonder if you talk a little bit more about that, like the example of the VP, right, in Europe.
Yeah.
Probably a poorly articulated goal, very important to the company.
Right.
And maybe not just launch for open 3 offices, that's not.
That's exactly right. So repeat the question is, in setting the goals, part of the success is articulating what that goal is and what the metrics are that follow. And you're absolutely right. We then drilled down, like, launching in Europe, why not launch in Asia? Like, maybe Brazil. Like, why is it that Europe matters? And how will you know if you accomplished what you cared about? Right? It's one thing to say, well, we want to launch because the competitor we heard about is going to launch in Europe. But maybe you want to let them launch in 19 more countries and spread themselves too thin and destroy margins while you shore up the business at home. And I think the conversation that actually followed that was to go back to the 3, cross one off, put Europe on, and then talk about what does Europe mean and how will you know if it was worthwhile. And there it was, in this particular case, getting to customer milestones and attrition related to, because they had a model working pretty well in the United States, to then see if they could mimic what they'd done in the United States in Europe. And only then did they actually have a goal that they could then connect to what those other teams were working on with metrics, right? So this goes back to Ken Norton's comment about you keep asking, and then what, and then what, and then what? And so we started with launch Europe. And then what? Well, we'll have 5 countries with teams, in place, and then what? Well, we'll get to 1,000 customers in each locale, and then what? Well, we'll get repeat business from those initial customers above our US threshold of 70% repeat engagement. Then we had something we could focus on. And then, you go back to Europe and say, no, it's not launch in Europe, it's launch in 5 markets where our attrition rates meet or exceed our US targets by this number. And then the team suddenly goes, oh, shit, how are we going to do that? And that's when you've got something that everybody looks at and says, well, we can't just incrementally launch a website and think that that'll be fine. And that was when we finally had something tangible that they could work with. Over here. Up back there, and then I'll come down here. Great question. Tips on managing the cadence of communication within the quarter. I think this is as much a company and cultural question. I don't know that there's a right or a wrong answer. I know in my particular case, if I was leaving GV tomorrow and starting a company, I don't think I'd do daily OKR updates. Because if I've set a sufficiently ambitious goal, I don't think 24 hours is really much opportunity to get much daylight between them. At Google, typically, there's a mid-quarter check-in. When teams hit sufficient milestones, that generally gets communicated outward. And a little interesting historical footnote. So I mentioned John Doerr at the beginning. John is a partner at Kleiner Perkins, who I'm sure many of you know. John was I believe, first institutional investor in Google back in the day, and has been on the board at Google for the last 18 years. John brought OKRs from Intel. OKRs were invented by Andy Grove, or at least popularized by Andy Grove, in the 60s. But they only existed, this was fascinating, I went back and read Andy Grove's book where he talks about OKRs, and they get about a paragraph. So, Andy spent a paragraph, I wasted 7 years of humanity. I think Andy's getting a lot more leverage out of his paragraph than I do out of my hour and a half. OKRs existed purely as a communication vehicle for middle managers. That was it. There was no sense of ambition. They weren't trying to shoot for the moon. It was just middle managers who knew what their people were working on, communicating out to the rest of the company. This is our alignment. This is how we know that we're working on the right things. They didn't have email, right? They didn't have any easy way to communicate out. So OKRs became the vernacular that they used inside the company. Google, it's mid-quarter check-ins with periodic updates at milestones. If you're working on a more compressed timetable where you're setting monthly goals, you might do it weekly. But again, I think you run the risk of simply reinforcing that you haven't yet accomplished something, which can start to feel kind of defeatist. Yeah, down here. Why 3 objectives? This is, the Monty Python. The 3 shall be the number, not 2, unless from 2 you go to 3, and not 4. The reason is, I have this fight with most companies I talk to because they're certain that they really need 4 or 5. No one ever has too few, right? They always have more than they think I'll let them have. I think it's that you get clarity from constraint. I think you get there is a discipline that gets instilled when you agree to only focus on a few things. And remember I said early on about the, it's the permission to not work on things. Part of the benefit there, candidly, is you're removing a lot of politics from where people spend their time. Right? People don't feel like you're playing favorites if they come to you with a good idea and you say, that is interesting. Let's revisit that next quarter, instead of chasing the squirrel that just appeared. So 3 is great, 2 is even better, right? And if you can agree as a company that there is one thing as a company that matters most, well, maybe that is the way to go. I find if you start spreading people's focus out over more than a few, you are unlikely to make sufficient progress on sufficiently ambitious goals. I think instead what you're going to end up getting is you'll get a little bit of progress across a bunch of different things instead of really shooting for the moon and getting there once in a while. How are we doing on time? It looks like we're doing okay here, and then we'll go there. So the question is, how do you keep alignment between the company and the team OKRs? It's interesting. This is an area where I've seen people have different opinions, and I think this may be also somewhat cultural within the company. There are companies where it is very much a bottoms-up process, and the leaders then try and divine from what the teams believe are most important. What's the thread that connects these, or I'm going to pick and choose. That is not my style. I would much rather know that if I'm the founder, that I am sufficiently connected to what is most important for the company, that I can clearly articulate what those 1, 2, or 3 things are. I'll tell you, the most nervous I've ever been walking into a portfolio company, they asked me to come in and sort of help them kick off OKRs. The CEO was not able to make the meeting. Probably was a sign that I should have paid a little more attention to. But all of the CEO's direct reports were in the room. I said, all right, it's okay. He's not here. It's great. We'll keep going. If he was here, what would he say the 2 or 3 most important things to the company are? And I got shrugs. Okay. Little worried that the lieutenants can't articulate what the general is most focused on. Again, that was maybe sign number 2. So let's go around, instead of as a group. How about, across the teams, you tell me, if you were the CEO, what would you be most focused on? And I had wildly different answers. That was a problem, because that company really didn't know what it wanted to be. It was instead just sort of, let's just make everything better, instead of consciously articulating, this is the thing we want, and then we're going to do everything we can to marshal all of our resources to achieve that thing. So in terms of how to keep them in alignment, generally speaking, the company OKRs aren't going to change mid-quarter, right? They may change quarter to quarter. In fact, I think it's often good that they do. You don't want these rollover OKRs that are always the same. But then the team level commitments need to keep their eye on what that North Star is and understand that they are often, but not always, focused on initiatives that are connected to what the company has articulated matters most. Down here.
You talked about milestones and achieving them and then maybe reporting out into those points. But I'm wondering if you're allowing your team to get creative about what they're doing, how much of it is kind of a pre-planning process or project management type exercise of setting milestones, and if you're only achieving maybe 60 or maybe 90% of a goal or metric, when did you hit that milestone?
Yep. So the question is, I talked about milestones. When do you know how to communicate them? How do you know what they are? Is it project management or planning exercise? And if you only get 60 or 90% of a metric, You know, the last part you said.
Yeah, is that an achieved milestone?
Is that an achieved milestone? So, I'm really glad you asked, because one of the things that I spent more time in the video talking about, but I'll reinforce here. When Google grades at the end of every quarter, OKRs, it's on a 0 to 1 scale. 0, you made no progress whatsoever. 1, you knocked it out of the park. If you are always getting 1s, you are not a rock star, you are a sandbagger. Okay? The expectation is that the sweet spot for really killing it is 60 to 70%, 0.6 to 0.7. Now, when I was getting ready to do that video, I went back and I looked at every quarter OKR, every quarter's OKRs that I had individually formed and the teams that I had been a part of. And it was kind of staggering that I would look at in any given quarter, and I think my worst quarter from a numbers point of view was about a 0.55, and my best quarter was like a 0.72. Now, this is sort of like whose line is it anyway? The numbers don't really matter that much, except as a directional indicator of, are you in that sweet spot, or are you always hitting 1, which is actually a bad sign, not a good sign? Or are you always hitting 0? Are you always saying, you know, I'm going to get to the moon, and you're lucky if you get to Fremont? Like, that might be a problem that you need to really better understand. I don't see this as a project management challenge, because the OKRs are explicitly not telling you how to go from A to Z. Instead, you're giving the team liberty to figure out, what are you going to try, how are you going to get there? But within that, they are then going to build their own plans for how to actually execute to get there. I think the milestones will vary based on, you know, what are the goals that are being set, and what are the dependencies across teams, right? If product hits some major milestone that engineering needs to know about, or that ops or finance need to know about, you generally want to over-communicate and let the team then selectively filter, right? This is where I wish I'd had Slack back in the day, because we have companies in our portfolio who have an OKR channel in Slack, where it's just sort of the running commentary on, we tried this, we didn't make that, where, you know, we have an insight that we think we might be getting close to breaking out, and it's this, and if I really want to dig in, no matter where I am in the company, I can do that. I can look in, I can follow it, I can reach out and learn more. I will also say that for me as a PM at Google, OKRs were a fascinating way that when I was going to go with hat in hand to another team at Google and ask for help, OKRs were a great way for me to figure out how to craft my request in a way that was relevant to things that they cared about. They don't care about me and my project. They care about what things they've committed to. So I can better understand, okay, what are the metrics that they're focused on? What are they watching? Is anything that I'm asking for connected to that? Because if it is, I'm going to lead with that. And that was a great way of me making sure that I was in alignment with them and vice versa, versus just saying, hey, I need you to do a thing. I've been ignoring over here. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so good question. So rephrasing, your prior company, where there had been several attempts at rolling out OKRs, differing understanding of what that meant, so that teams were kind of doing their own thing, and it becomes hard if your definition of OKRs is different from the CEO's and is different from your peers in different groups. That's probably pretty destined to fail if everyone can, use their own definition of what it is the company's trying to do. This should be a scaffolding or a framework that the company all understands. We are defining, these are the objectives that we care most about as a company, And then as a leadership team, we're going to sit around the table. We're going to agree, based on those, what things we are focused on. The exercise I was talking to you about, where I was facilitating a team, the Europe team, that is often how I've seen it work very well. Get all the ideas up on the board, give out Post-its, let people vote, get a visual pretty quickly. If the votes are very evenly distributed, that's maybe not a bad thing, but it is at least indicative that you don't have consensus, right? You don't have a quorum. And there needs to then be a frank conversation about how to get from 14 to 3 and get agreement on why those 3 are the 3 that matter most. And then maybe it's that we'll tackle the next 3 in the next quarter. But I think everyone needs to have an understanding of what it is. And that shouldn't be that hard, but this is an area where you don't get the groundswell, grassroots, everybody just tries to make things better. Like, you all need to agree on a definition and a framework. And then hold yourselves to it, whether that's the CEO's job, whether there's an ops person who will take responsibility for meaningfully embracing a common approach. This, for me, is how many of you know the term bike shedding, right? So probably an apocryphal story, but I think if you go to bikeshed.org, there's a great listing. And it was a power plant board of directors meeting, and they had 2 agenda items in the meeting room, and one was, where is the next nuclear facility going to be? And the other was, do we or don't we build a bike shed for the employees who live in the employer housing, a couple miles away? And no one around the table fully appreciated all of the issues in the 6-foot-tall stack of papers that had been delivered to the board in support of the nuclear facility decision. So they all tried to look like they belonged in the room and gave it, asked the right question or 2, but then put that one to bed. And then everyone could easily understand all of the issues to be talked about with the bike shed. Is it concrete? Is it wood? Does it have a tin roof? Is it painted? If it's painted, what color is the bike shed? The answer is, it doesn't matter. Just pick one and then build it and move on. Any number of equally valid options are great. Just pick one. So that, to me, feels a little bit like a bike shed kind of question. That's even become shorthand for many of the teams that I was on. If you start rat-holing on a question where, like, there are 6 equally valid options, I don't care. Pick it. And then agree that you've all picked it and move on. But it's a common problem where no one wants to be seen as the imposer of process. So it's like, just pick whatever you think works. Well, no, this is a case where everybody sort of needs to agree that we're going to speak English at meetings. You don't get to show up and speak whatever language you want. It's going to make it harder. Yeah. Probably time for one last question, right? Or are we out of time? We're out of time. All right. Listen, thank you all very much.